Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. That indentation, stark against the aged metal of my apartment door at 3 a.m, should have screamed warnings my sleep-deprived brain refused to hear. 12 hours wrestling crates and manifests at the depot had scoured my thoughts down to the bone, leaving only the primal need for oblivion. But this mark, it dwarfed any human palm. Its contours sunk into the steel, a physical depression, not a smear of grime or paint, a violation. Exhaustion gnawed, a dull ache behind my eyes. Juvenile pranksters, I mumbled, the key grating in the lock. Inside, the familiar dark greeted me, unchanged. My keys clattered onto the worn Formica counter. Work boots thudded onto the floor. The shower's heat was a brief mercy, sluicing away the warehouse grit. Wrapped in a towel, clad only in boxers and a threadbare tee, I collapsed onto the mattress. Sleep claimed me instantly, a heavy, dreamless shroud. Crack. Eyes flew open. A percussive shock from the kitchen, sharp as shattering ceramic. My bedside clock glowed, 4:47 a.m. Absolute stillness descended, amplifying the frantic thrumming in my ears. Then, the methodical scrape and slide of drawers, one after another, slow, deliberate. My mouth turned to dust. I lived alone. No one possessed a key. My fingers groped the nightstand. Empty space. The phone. Charging. Kitchen. Another drawer slid open, the jangle of silverware echoing unnaturally loud. My heart hammered against my ribs. Slowly, I eased my weight off the bed. A floorboard groaned beneath me. The kitchen sounds ceased. Utter silence flooded the apartment, thick and watchful. In the closet, a baseball bat leaned against the wall. My hand closed around the worn grip, knuckles bleaching white. Through the narrow gap of the bedroom door, a sliver of hallway lay shrouded in shadow. Stillness. Then footfalls. Heavy, yet somehow soft. Not boots, not shoes. Bare feet, it sounded like. Wet, bare feet, slapping against the cheap linoleum with a sodden, arrhythmic cadence. I hefted the bat, inching towards the door. The steps drew nearer, shambling down the corridor. The rhythm was wrong, utterly wrong. Not the steady left-right of a person, but a lurching, uneven gait. A shadow slid across the visible slice of hallway. My breath hitched. Too tall. Too broad, its movement fluid yet disjointed, like a badly manipulated marionette. The slapping stopped directly outside my door. Respiration followed, a wet, ragged inhalation, bubbling as if drawn through viscous fluid. The door began to creak inward, slow, inexorable. I raised the bat, muscles coiled, but the sight that filled the doorway turned my limbs to lead. It towered, its skull grazing the doorframe. Skin, the color of spoiled meat, stretched taut over impossible angles, an emaciated frame defying gravity. Proportions skewed into nightmare, arms dangling past its knees, terminating in hands like grotesque platters. Hands that perfectly matched the sigil branded onto my front door. Its legs bent backward, avian hinges supporting its weight. And the face, featureless save for a maw split in the skull ear to ear, crammed with needle-fine teeth, row upon gleaming row. A dark, thick liquid, not water, oozed from its chin, spattering onto the worn carpet. Immobilized, breathless, its mouth stretched impossibly wide, the gurgling respiration intensifying. A stench rolled off it, decay and stagnant water, thick enough to taste. It lurched forward, taking a step into the room on those backward-bending legs, the motion jerky, alien. Those colossal hands swung loosely, fingers twitching. Primal terror finally broke the paralysis. I swung the bat with every ounce of strength. It connected against its ribs with a dull thud, then bounced off as if striking granite. The impact vibrated up my arms, jarring the bat from my grasp. The creature didn't even register the blow. Instead, an enormous hand reached, fingers splayed. I ducked, scrambling beneath the reaching limb. My shoulder cracked against the doorframe as I bolted, the pain irrelevant. Adrenaline surged, a chemical fire propelling me down the hall towards escape. Behind me, the sodden slapping quickened, closing the distance. I reached the front door, fumbled with the knob. Locked fast. It wouldn't yield. The deadbolt was thrown back, the chain disengaged, yet the door remained immovable, sealed as if welded into its frame. The footsteps halted behind me. Hot, fetid breath stirred the hair on my neck. Slowly, turning felt like tearing my own muscles. I faced it. It filled the hallway now, impossibly larger, its crown scraping the ceiling, leaving damp streaks on the plaster. That rictus grin widened, revealing teeth receding into infinite, fleshy darkness. A hand lunged. I threw myself sideways, rolling across the living room floor, my hip colliding with the coffee table, scattering cheap magazines. The creature followed, its immense form contorting, head brushing the ceiling. I scrambled upright, desperation clawing its way up my throat, and fled towards the kitchen. My phone lay on the counter, tethered to its charger. Fingers shaking violently, I snatched it, thumb jabbing at the screen. Black, lifeless, impossible. It had been plugged in for hours. A shadow eclipsed the doorway. I turned. It stooped, folding its unnatural height to enter, those hands reaching again, fingers wide enough to encircle my waist. My gaze snagged on the dish rack, a knife still gleaming wet. I seized it, slashing wildly at the nearest advancing hand. The blade bit deep into gray flesh. No blood welled, but a black, viscous fluid erupted, spattering onto the linoleum where it hissed and steamed like acid. A sound tore from the creature then, a high-frequency keen that vibrated my teeth and made my eardrums ache. The wounded hand retracted, but the other shot out with blinding speed. Fingers like iron bands clamped around my chest, crushing the air from my lungs. Effortlessly, it lifted me clear off the floor, drawing me closer to that abyssal face. The jaw unhinged, stretching wider, revealing gullet lined with yet more teeth. The stench of utter putrefaction washed over me. Panic lent a final surge of strength. I plunged the knife into its wrist. More black ichor gushed, slicking my arm, burning with caustic agony where it touched skin. I screamed, a raw sound of pain and terror. For a fraction of a second, the grip slackened. I twisted, wrenching free, hitting the kitchen floor hard. Black fluid pooled and spread, eating corrosive holes in the flooring. Steam rose, thick with the smell of rot. The bathroom, the only door left. I scrambled towards it, the creatures keening escalating behind me, rattling the window panes. I slammed the door, fumbled the lock, knowing it was futile. The small window above the toilet offered a sliver of hope. I clambered onto the seat, reaching for the latch. The door imploded inward in a shower of splintered wood. A hand, larger than my head, thrust through the opening. Off balance, I tumbled backward, my skull cracking against the porcelain sink. Stars burst behind my eyes. Dazed, lying on the cool tile, blood trickling into my eye, I looked up. The creature squeezed its grotesque bulk through the ruined doorway. Its mouth opened again, but this time, something else emerged from the depths of its throat. A long, black, segmented tongue, writhing like a sentient serpent. It touched my leg. White-hot, searing pain shot through me. A scream built, but died soundlessly in my throat. Darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. The last image burned into my retinas was that gaping maw descending, endless rows of teeth spiraling into oblivion. Then, nothing. I awoke in bed. Sunlight, incongruously bright, streamed through the window. A nightmare? The thought evaporated as my eyes focused. Corroded patches marred the carpet where the black fluid had fallen. The shattered remnants of the bathroom door lay strewn across the hallway tiles, and on the front door, now starkly visible from the inside, the handprint remained, pressed deep into the unyielding steel. That was 3 nights past. Sleep has become an impossibility. Every night, precisely at 4:47 a.m., the wet, slapping footsteps begin in the kitchen. Each night, they draw nearer to my bedroom door. Hotels offered no sanctuary. Sleeping rough in my car proved useless. Driving through the endless dark only delayed the inevitable. At the appointed minute, the sound found me. Last night, another print appeared. This one sunk into the hood of my car. Tonight marks the 4th night. A chill uncertainty tells me there will not be a 5th. Dusk bleeds across the sky. In a few hours, the clock will turn. Somewhere nearby, already, I hear the drip of water. It's getting louder. The shutter whispered, a tiny mechanical sigh capturing the instant. Lowering the camera, Elias Vance squinted, the LCD screen a harsh glare against the deepening forest gloom. And then he saw it, a flicker, a disturbance amongst the sentinel pines, something immense moving with unnatural fluidity. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he magnified the image. Pixels swam, then coalesced into a form that defied taxonomy, defied reason itself. In that stark, illuminated moment, the familiar contours of his world dissolved. Elias Vance. Until then, merely a chronicler of the wild, a man whose reputation rested on patience and the pursuit of fleeting moments with North America's shyest denizens. At 32, he'd tracked wolves through Yellowstone's vastness, shadowed cougars across jagged peaks, waited motionless for the ursine lords of Alaska. Yet, nothing in that hard-won experience had forged an armor for what waited in the primeval depths of the Pacific Northwest. It began 72 hours prior. Whispers, fragmented accounts of wolf packs exhibiting anomalous size and behavior, had drawn him like a moth to a cryptic flame. He sought the image that would transcend documentation, the one that would etch his name into the annals of wildlife photography. He'd plunged deep into the wilderness, leaving trails and maps far behind, provisioned for a week of solitary immersion. The initial days offered only frustration veiled in beauty. The elegant calligraphy of tracks, scat like dark jewels on the loam, the skeletal remains of a deer, poignant memento mori of the hunt. But the wolves themselves remained phantoms. As the third day bled into twilight, resignation began to set in, the bitter taste of a fruitless pilgrimage. That's when the sound ripped through the stillness. A howl, resonant and chilling, echoed between the ancient trees, vibrating deep within Elias's chest. Something felt profoundly wrong about it. A timbre too deep, laced with an unsettlingly human cadence. Excitement, sharp and intoxicating, overrode his unease. Camera clutched like a talisman, he moved toward the call, his steps muffled by the thick carpet of moss and decaying leaves. The forest shifted around him as he advanced. Trees loomed, gnarled and immense, their branches intertwining overhead like the arthritic fingers of forgotten gods. The undergrowth thickened, sprouting vegetation alien to his knowledge, shapes and textures that seemed dreamt rather than grown. An expectant silence descended, profound and heavy, punctuated only by the brittle snap of twigs beneath his boots. Then light beckoned, a clearing ahead, bathed in the molten gold of the setting sun. And there, silhouetted against the luminous backdrop at the clearing's far edge, stood a colossal dark figure. His breath hitched. A wolf? Impossibly large, yet perhaps the failing light played tricks on his perception. He raised the camera, the telephoto lens extending like an inquisitive snout. Through the viewfinder, the shape sharpened. Cloaked in dark fur, yes, but the proportions were aberrant, defying lupine anatomy. It stood bipedally, its back to him, easily spanning 7, perhaps 8 feet in height. His finger hovered, paralyzed by cognitive dissonance. What manner of being was this? A bear, contorted by shadow? The thought dissolved even as it formed. The silhouette was too lean, too humanoid, its posture imbued with a sentience that prickled his skin. Impulse overriding intellect, he depressed the shutter. The click seemed deafening in the cathedral quiet. The creature's head swiveled. Elias found himself impaled by a gaze that was utterly devoid of the animal. Twin points of light, embers of startling intelligence, bored into him. For an eternity compressed into heartbeats, they remained locked in that silent exchange. Predator and observer, observer and enigma. Then, with a swiftness that defied its bulk, it melted into the surrounding trees, vanishing as if dissolving into the very air. He stood rooted, camera dangling forgotten from its strap. What had he witnessed? His mind, a frantic loom, wove and unwove possibilities, cryptid folklore, undiscovered hominids, elaborate deception. Trembling fingers navigated the camera's menu. There it was, the image, slightly blurred by low light and sudden motion, yet undeniably depicting a massive, hirsute figure, its face angled toward him. Proof. Tangible, terrifying proof of something utterly unknown. A strange alchemy of exhilaration and primal fear surged through him as the implications began to crystallize. This photograph. It could rewrite history, redefine humanity's place in the natural order. His name, Elias Vance, whispered on the winds of discovery. Yet, a colder, deeper instinct murmured caution. Some secrets endure because they are guarded. Some veils remain intact for profound reasons. Sleep offered no refuge that night, his mindscape populated by luminous eyes and fleeting, colossal shadows. Dawn's first fragile light found him awake, examining the photograph anew. In the stark clarity of day, doubt, insidious and rational, crept in. Had exhaustion conjured phantoms? Had he misinterpreted a familiar beast through a lens of expectation? But the digital file remained, immutable, irrefutable evidence of the extraordinary. He broke camp with decisive urgency. Find it again. Clearer images. Video, perhaps. The world had to see. He spent the day immersed in the hunt, deploying every skill honed over years of tracking elusive prey. But this quarry was different. The spoor was subtle, almost ephemeral, a strangely bent sapling, an impossibly large impression in the damp earth that was more footprint than paw track. And persistently, unsettlingly, the sensation of being watched, of rolls reversed, prickled at the nape of his neck. As hours waned, the forest seemed to conspire against him, growing denser, darker. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the suffocating canopy woven by interlocking branches. He consulted his GPS, a frown creasing his brow. The device placed him miles astray, in terrain uncharted on his maps. Just as retreat began to seem the only sane option, he heard it again, that same profound, near-human howl. Closer, perilously close. Heart slamming against his ribs, camera held ready like a shield, he pressed forward. He shoved through a thicket of shoulder-high ferns and stumbled into another clearing. This one felt different, ancient. Monoliths of weathered stone stood sentinel in a rough circle, their surfaces carved with intricate, swirling glyphs that seemed to shimmer and writhe if stared at directly. And there, at the circle's heart, stood the creature. In the unfiltered light of day, its form was shockingly clear. It was a being torn from the pages of forgotten mythology, part man, part beast, its powerful frame covered in thick, dark fur. The face, disturbingly familiar in its structure, possessed a heavy brow and a mouth hinting at formidable dentition. Those intelligent, knowing eyes found his, and a jolt, akin to recognition, shot through Elias. It knew him. It had anticipated his arrival. The camera hung inert at his side. Terror should have sent him fleeing, instinct screaming for survival. Yet an inexplicable gravity held him fast. An aura of immense antiquity emanated from the being, a sense of wisdom far older than human comprehension. It raised a hand, unmistakably a hand, complete with opposable thumb, and gestured towards his camera. The meaning resonated without words. Record this. With hands that shook uncontrollably, Elias lifted the camera and began shooting. The creature posed, turning with deliberate grace, offering itself to the lens from every angle. It was the most surreal, most profound photo session imaginable. When he finally lowered the camera, the creature offered a slow nod, an expression of arcane satisfaction. Then it began to change. Its form shimmered, distorting like heat haze rising from asphalt. Reality buckled, and abruptly, impossibly, Elias was staring at himself, a perfect duplicate, down to the smear of mud on his boots and the fresh scratch on his left hand from a thorn bush encountered hours earlier. He staggered back, his world tilting on its axis. The replica smiled, but the expression was alien on his own features, too wide, too knowing. It spoke, and though the voice was his own, the language was utterly foreign, syllables ancient and resonant, echoing with the weight of millennia. As the sounds filled the clearing, the symbols etched into the monoliths began to pulse with soft internal light, synchronizing with the strange cadence. Vertigo overwhelmed him. The clearing spun, trees dissolving into a vortex of green and brown. He felt himself falling, plummeting into an abyss where the ground never rose to meet him. He awoke with a gasp, head throbbing, the familiar confines of his tent a jarring reality. His camera lay beside him. For a disorienting moment, he clung to the hope it was all a hyper-realistic nightmare. Then he checked the memory card. The photos existed. The blurred image from the first encounter, and then the sequence from the stone circle. Sharp, undeniable, impossible. As he scrolled through them, a glacial chill traced his spine. In every frame where the creature faced the camera directly, the face staring back was his own. Not similar, not reminiscent. His identical, down to the faint scar bisecting his chin, a relic from a childhood fall. What abyss had he peered into? What were these stones, these symbols that pulsed with light? And the terrifying central question, what unholy connection existed between this ancient entity and Elias Vance? He packed his equipment with trembling urgency, his thoughts a maelstrom. Logic dictated he alert someone. Scientists, authorities. This discovery could shatter paradigms, rewrite the human story. Yet, as he shouldered his pack, a profound intuitive certainty settled upon him. This knowledge wasn't meant for dissemination. Not now. These woods held secrets far older and more potent than human science could comprehend. Secrets perhaps best left undisturbed. Hiking out, the forest felt different, charged with unseen awareness. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving a vital part of himself behind in that stone circle. Or perhaps, more disturbingly, that he was carrying something away with him. Something ancient, wild, and utterly unknowable. One truth resonated with absolute clarity. The life he had known was irrevocably over. The world, once familiar territory, now stretched before him, vast and strange, teeming with unimagined possibilities and lurking dangers. And somewhere in the deep woods, wearing his face, moved a being that held the answers to questions he was only now beginning to understand how to ask. His journey hadn't concluded. It had merely, terrifyingly begun. With the whir and click, the camera spat out a blank square, an innocuous start. But as the ghost of an image bloomed upon the paper, a visceral wrongness seized me. Not the serene parlor I'd framed, no. This was its desecrated twin, ravaged, furniture splintered, walls weeping dark, unspeakable patterns. A cold dread, sharp as ice shards, pierced my core. This single, impossible photograph was the first tremor of an earthquake set to shatter my reality, merging what was, what is, and what horrors might yet bloom. Alara, That's my name. Before this, specters were merely campfire fodder, prophecies the stuff of dog-eared paperbacks. Practicality was my creed. Until the Ashworths, dear souls celebrating 4 decades together on some sun-drenched cruise, entrusted their labyrinthine Victorian home to my care. A month. Just keep the dust settled, the pipes from freezing. Explore, they'd encouraged, their house a museum of accumulated lives, heavy with the scent of beeswax and thyme. Up dusty stair treads I climbed into the house's forgotten crown. The attic breathed stale air, a congregation of ghosts draped in white sheets, trunks overflowing with sepia memories. Time felt thick, viscous, and there, perched on a splintered shelf amidst forgotten hat boxes, sat the instrument. A Polaroid, its retro angle stark against the gloom, strangely pristine. An artifact out of sync. Its heft surprised me, solid, cool plastic and metal, possessed by idle curiosity, a simple question. Does it work? I aimed it through the open hatch towards the tranquil parlor below. A satisfying clunk, a mechanical sigh, and the square ejected, pale and expectant. I fanned it gently, watching the chemical magic conjure the ruin. The parlor, yes, but violated. Chairs mauled, porcelain shattered, the very air thick with pictured violence, and those stains, blooming like morbid roses across the damask wallpaper, crimson, unmistakable. My breath hitched. Trembling fingers clutched the impossible image as I scrambled down the attic stairs. Below, serenity. Polished wood gleamed, cushions sat plumped, not a mote danced in the tranquil light. The contrast was a physical blow, my mind reeling, unable to bridge the chasm between the placid room and its brutal photographic echo. Delusion, perhaps? A trick of light, of frayed nerves? I needed proof. The kitchen became my next subject. Click, whir, eject. The developing square revealed not gleaming tile but inferno. Flames devoured chintz curtains. The stove buckled, a carcass of scorched metal. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Picture after picture I took, a desperate cartographer of doom. The garden, choked with spectral weeds, roses withered on thorny claws. The Ashworth's bedroom, invaded by rot. The mattress sagging beneath phantom decay. The welcoming porch, timbers splintered, consumed by an unseen blight. Each image, a postcard from a future I refused to accept. Then, the ultimate test, turning the lens upon myself. A hesitant click, the face that swam into view was mine, undeniably, yet ravaged by years I hadn't lived. Silver threaded through my hair, fear carved deep canyons around eyes that stared out with haunted exhaustion. And behind me, oh God, behind me lurked something. A presence coalesced from shadow, indistinct but undeniably there. One amorphous hand extending, reaching. The camera slipped from my grasp, clattering against the floorboards. I recoiled, hitting the wall, the cool plaster a stark contrast to the heat flushing my skin. Prank? Illusion? No. A chill uncertainty settled deep in my marrow. This wasn't a trick. It was foresight. The camera didn't capture light. It captured time, spooling out glimpses of a grim, encroaching tomorrow. Hours bled away. I sat amidst the scattered squares of prophecy, a mosaic of ruin laid out on the polished floor. Were these visions immutable fate, carved in stone? Or were they warnings, malleable, offering a sliver of agency? As twilight painted the windows violet, resolve hardened within me. If this cursed device showed what could be, then perhaps intervention was possible. I wouldn't be a passive observer to this unfolding disaster. I had to try. The ransacked parlor was my first battleground. Windows latched tight, bolts thrown, heavy oak sideboard dragged to barricade the main door, a fortress against phantom intruders. Then the kitchen's fiery premonition. Appliances unplugged, gas valve seized shut, buckets brimming with water standing sentinel against spectral flames. Night surrendered to a bruised dawn as I waged war against the future, pruning the garden's pictured decay with frantic shears, probing the porch floorboards for the slightest hint of weakness. Exhaustion gnawed, but a fragile hope flickered. Surely, something had shifted. My hand shook as I raised the Polaroid once more. Parlor, kitchen, garden, selfie. I held my breath, watching the images materialize like apparitions. Despair crashed down, cold and heavy. The ruin remained. The fire still raged in effigy. The decay persisted. Futile, utterly futile. Then my own face stared back. Older, haunted. But wait, the shadow. It still lingered, a stain on the background, yet was it fainter? Its grasping hand seemed less immediate, hovering a fraction further back. Not victory, not prevention, but alteration. A minuscule nudge against the tide of inevitability. Hope, tenacious and perhaps foolish, rekindled in my chest. Small changes then. Perhaps that was the path. Weeks blurred into a fever dream, fueled by caffeine and fear. The camera became an extension of my hand, its whirring click the soundtrack to my waking nightmare. Each new photo scrutinized, compared, measured against its predecessor for the faintest deviation. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind raced, charting potential futures, plotting interventions. My crusade spilled beyond the Ashworth's property lines. Photographic glimpses of neighborhood blight spurred me to action. Anonymous tips about crumbling facades, rallying neighbors for cleanup drives, fervent, bordering on manic pleas about smoke detectors and deadbolts. And slowly, agonizingly, the prophecies did seem to soften. The pictured devastation lessened its grip. The shadow in my spectral portraits retreated, becoming more ephemeral. Yet this relentless focus on what might be eroded the what is. Friendships withered from unanswered calls. Meals went uneaten. The house transformed from a home into a command center against a spectral siege, every object positioned with grim purpose. Reality intruded with the shrill ring of the telephone. Mrs. Ashworth's voice, tight with concern. They'd tried reaching me for days. My terse, cryptic messages about fortifications and potential hazards had alarmed them. Their sun-drenched cruise was ending prematurely. They were flying back. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. Explain? How could I possibly articulate the visions, the shadow, the Polaroid oracle? They would see only madness. Perhaps they'd be right. A whirlwind of frantic activity consumed me. Furniture wrestled back to its rightful place, hastily pruned shrubs awkwardly replanted, every sign of my obsessive campaign scrubbed away. Erase the evidence, erase the madness. All the while, the camera kept clicking, a desperate need to see if normalcy had finally taken root in its cursed lens. Then, one image emerged. The parlor. Immaculate, serene, just as I'd first found it. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so potent it buckled my knees, until my eyes snagged on a detail in the periphery. Tucked into the deepest corner of the photograph, almost missed, lurked a smudge of darkness, a familiar silhouette, a hand reaching. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Framed in the parlor doorway stood the figure from the photographs, no longer spectral but chillingly solid, coalescing from the ambient dimness. Its outstretched hand wasn't empty. It held another Polaroid camera identical to mine. As the figure lifted its device, aiming the lens directly at me, revelation struck with the force of a physical blow, blinding in its terrible clarity. This wasn't foresight. It was a mirror, a cycle. The shadow wasn't some external menace. It was the ghost of my own obsession, the woman I was becoming, trapped in this loop of fear. A flare of artificial light bleached the world white. When spots ceased dancing before my eyes, the doorway was empty. The figure had vanished. But on the polished floor where it had stood lay a single, freshly ejected photograph. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled as I retrieved it. The image resolved. Me, Alara, standing frozen in the parlor, the cursed camera clutched in my hand, surrounded by the scattered evidence of my descent. My face in the picture was a canvas of dawning horror. And behind me, almost lost in the composition's background, stood a faint, shadowy figure, raising its own camera. The loop made visible. Clarity, sharp and painful, pierced through the fog of fear. I knew the only way out. Methodically, almost reverently, I gathered every single prophetic square, every artifact of my obsession. Carrying the camera and its poisonous fruit, I ascended once more to the dusty attic. Back onto the splintered shelf it went, nestled amongst the forgotten relics, exactly as I'd discovered it. Setting it down felt like shedding a leaden shroud. The future's terrifying ambiguity settled back into place, and, strangely, it felt like liberation. This desperate scrabble to control the uncontrollable had forged my own prison, nearly molding me into the very specter I dreaded. When the Ashworths arrived the following afternoon, weary from travel but relieved, they found their home pristine, undisturbed. I greeted them on the porch, the smile I offered surprisingly authentic. The camera, the photographs, the shadow born of my own fear. These remained my secrets, locked away in the attic's dusty silence. Some burdens are meant to be carried alone. Does the camera still wait up there, a dormant trap for the next curious soul? Does the cycle lie poised to repeat? The thought surfaces occasionally, a faint echo, but I push it back. The future remains unwritten, a vast, exhilarating, terrifying expanse. Each breath, each choice is a brushstroke on that canvas, wrestling with phantoms of what might be only chained me to despair. Freedom, I learned in that house of whispering shadows, lies in the messy, unpredictable, glorious now. And if, in the periphery of my vision, a flicker of darkness sometimes seems to coalesce, I meet it with nothing more than a quiet acknowledgement, then turn my gaze forward. Some images are best left to fade, unseen. That expanse of glass, my living room's eye onto the world, I once cherished it. When I first settled into this old house, the sheer size of the window felt like a luxury, bathing the room in liquid gold sunlight, offering an unfiltered vista of the street's quiet choreography. Neighbors strolling past might glance in, yes, but it felt like transparency, an invitation. Now, that same pain feels less like a portal and more like a vulnerability, a gaping mouth. I recall the precise evening the shift began. Night had fallen. The house settled into its nocturnal size. I drifted towards the window, habit guiding my hand to draw the heavy velvet curtains. The locking mechanism was a simple brass crescent, nestled at the bottom sill. A flick, a click, secure, or so I believed. Later, deep in the clutches of sleep, around 3, a violent rattling tore me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The sound echoed from the living room, a frantic thwack, 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 like a gale tormenting an unsecured frame. Yet, the forecast had promised only placid stillness. Barefoot on the cool floorboards, I crept out. The curtains billowed softly, ghost-like, and there it was. The window jolted wide, rapping against the outer wall. I slapped the light switch, flooding the room. Outside, absolute darkness pressed against the glass. Not a leaf stirred. The skeletal branches of the sycamore stood utterly motionless. Moving closer, my fingers found the crescent latch. It was turned firmly to the locked position. Still, the window gaped open. A frown tightened my brow. I wrestled it shut, the wood groaning in protest, and drove the latch home, ensuring the catch bit deep. I tugged, pulled, tested its resistance. Solid, immovable. Annoyance eclipsed fear as I retreated. Must not have secured it properly, I reasoned, dismissing the jarring inconsistency. The following night, the ritual repeated. Weather check, calm. Window locked, latch confirmed with a deliberate tug. It held fast. Sleep claimed me, heavy and profound, until the familiar percussion jolted me back. Thud, thud, thud. A duller, more insistent rhythm this time. Eyes snapping open, a cold dread seeped into my limbs, my stomach twisting into a knot. My phone glowed. 2:37 a.m. Heart thumping a nervous tattoo, I stole into the living room. Again, the open window. Again, the spectral sway of the curtains. Outside, the night remained a picture of tranquility, utterly devoid of wind, yet the window hammered its senseless beat. Cursing under my breath, I flicked on a lamp and slammed it shut. Tested the latch again, scrutinizing every inch this time. Was there a hairline fracture? A hidden weakness? The metal, though burnished with age, appeared intact. I yanked with considerable force. It stayed shut. Shaking my head, I retreated, clinging to logic. An old house, an old mechanism. Perhaps the latch was fatigued, prone to slipping. Yes, that had to be it. Daylight brought a mission. I examined the window frame, the sill, the latch assembly, searching for the flaw, the elusive reason for its nocturnal rebellion. The components looked worn, but fundamentally sound. Still, I tightened the screws until they bit deeper into the wood, applied a whisper of lubricant to the moving parts. Locked, unlocked, pulled, locked, unlocked, tested. 10, 20 times. It never yielded. Confident, or perhaps merely hopeful, I waited for nightfall. After securing the window, I dragged a small armchair across the room, positioning it directly opposite. In the enveloping darkness, I sat, a silent sentinel, determined to witness the mechanism's failure firsthand. An hour crawled by, boredom gnawed, The house murmured only the refrigerator's low thrum. My spine began to ache. I rose, stretched, listened intently. Silence. A creeping disquiet prickled my skin, but I batted it away. Nothing. Clearly, my tinkering had worked. Satisfied, I surrendered to bed. It hadn't worked. Around 3, the banging erupted again, sharp and urgent, snatching me from sleep. A genuine chill, bone deep, traced its way up my arms, pulse frantic. "What in God's name?" I whispered, pushing myself out of bed. The living room tableau was achingly familiar. The window flung wide, shuddering against the frame, glass rattling ominously with each impact. I hit the overhead light. The room sprang into sharp relief, ordinary except for the agitated curtains. Bracing for a gust of night air, I approached. Nothing. The air hung perfectly still, heavy and close. No draft kissed my skin. The disconnect was jarring. Windless night, violently banging window. It made no sense. My hand, trembling slightly, reached for the cool glass. I forced it shut. As my fingers closed around the frame, a faint scrape sounded from behind me. I whirled, heart leaping. Only the familiar shapes of the couch, the coffee table, the inert television screen met my gaze. My eyes darted, scanning the periphery, hunting for movement. Stillness answered. I stood frozen for several minutes, breath catching in my throat, listening to the profound, unnerving quiet of the house. I resolved to stay there, a vigil in the living room. The television flickered on low volume, a meager companion against the silence. Perhaps constant observation would deter whatever it was. Nothing further transpired until the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the sky. In the gentle morning light, anxiety loosened its grip, replaced by exhaustion. I checked the latch again, still locked, and then the chilling realization crystallized. The latch was always found locked, even after the window had clearly been wide open. This wasn't a worn mechanism slipping. This wasn't normal wear and tear. A lump formed in my throat. I fought against the tendrils of supernatural dread, telling myself I was sleep-deprived, overlooking something simple. Could the latch somehow spring back into the locked position after the window slammed open? My ignorance of mechanics felt like a vulnerability. The subsequent nights blurred into a nightmarish pattern. Lock the window, sleep fitfully, awaken to the banging, find the window open, the latch inexplicably locked, close it, retreat. Frustration curdled into a persistent, low-grade fear I refused to name. I finally broke down and called Elias, a local handyman whose number I found tacked to a community board. He arrived that afternoon, a man smelling faintly of sawdust and practicality. He fiddled, he tested, he prodded. He replaced a small, worn bracket within the latch assembly, pronounced it sound, and assured me it wouldn't happen again. Relief washed over me, brief but potent. A tangible solution. It wasn't enough. That very night, the banging commenced around 2. By now, the sound triggered an immediate adrenaline-fueled alertness. Chest tight, a film of sweat cooling on my forehead, I marched into the living room. I grabbed the window frame, intent on slamming it shut with finality, and then I saw it. Captured in the dark reflection of the glass, a presence. A shadowy form loomed directly behind me. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. Goose flesh erupted across my skin. My scalp prickled with icy dread. My heart seized, then pounded with a force that seemed to fill the room, momentarily deafening me. Motionless, I stared into the reflection, trying to resolve the shape. It was tall, indistinct, a silhouette carved from deeper darkness, featureless and menacing. I spun around, a strangled cry escaping my lips, nearly stumbling. Nothing, just the empty room, bathed in the lamp's glow. My body trembled uncontrollably, nausea churned in my stomach. Impossible, I breathed, the word tasting like ash. But the image was seared onto my retinas. Sleep was unthinkable. I left every light burning, the artificial glare offering scant comfort. Each creak of the old house, each settling groan, sent jolts of panic through me. Had I truly seen it? A trick of the light? My own shadow distorted? The rational part of my brain scrabbled for explanations, but the visceral certainty of that reflected presence refused to fade. It had felt distinct, separate. Behind me. The urge to call someone, anyone, warred with profound embarrassment. Eventually, exhaustion won, pulling me into a shallow, disturbed sleep punctuated by phantom noises. The next day dawned gray and heavy, mirroring my mood. Boarding up the window seemed drastic, an admission of defeat. Instead, I drove to the hardware store, emerging with the most formidable lock I could find, a heavy-duty bolt, along with new, thick weather stripping. Perhaps a tighter seal, less play in the frame. An hour of determined effort saw everything installed. I tested the bolt, the latch, the window's resistance. Solid, secure. As a final, almost superstitious act, I crisscrossed the edges with thick strips of duct tape. Aesthetics be damned. I craved silence, peace. Evening descended, bringing with it a palpable tension. Making dinner felt like moving through water. Every glance towards the living room window conjured the memory of that dark shape. My shoulders remained hunched, my stomach a cold knot. Imagination, I told myself fiercely. Half-asleep hallucinations. The arguments felt thin, unconvincing. Midnight passed. I forced myself to bed around 1, drifting into an uneasy doze. Shortly after 2, a faint, insistent tapping pierced the silence, vibrating directly into my skull. My eyes flew open, heart hammering. I sat bolt upright, straining to hear. Absolute quiet. I fumbled for the bedside lamp. Click. The tapping ceased instantly. Mouth dry, I forced slow, deep breaths. Waiting, listening. Minutes stretched. Nothing. Dreaming. Then a single, resonant thud from the living room. Adrenaline surged hot and sharp. Fight or flight screamed through my veins. Hands clammy, legs unsteady, I slid from bed, grabbing a heavy flashlight, though why I couldn't say. Peeking around the doorframe, I saw the curtains stirring, just slightly, betraying movement. My pulse hammered against my eardrums. I flicked the main light switch. The window, it was partially ajar. One strip of duct tape hung loose, torn raggedly. The flashlight nearly slipped from my grasp. Striding forward, I slammed the window shut, shoving against it. Firm. No sign of forced entry, no splintered wood. And then the reflection caught my eye again. That obsidian shape standing just behind my shoulder. Closer this time. A gasp tore from my throat. I spun, flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the air. Empty space greeted me. The couch, the table, the chairs, all placidly normal. Panic clawed at me. I backed away from the window, breathing in ragged gasps. My mind raced, seeking refuge in logic and finding none. Tingling numbness spread through my fingers. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My body felt hyper-alert, braced for an invisible blow. Methodically, desperately, I searched the room. Under furniture, behind curtains, inside the hall closet. Nothing. No one. Just me and the oppressive silence. The rest of the night passed on the couch, lights blazing, my gaze fixed on the window. Every tiny sound, a floorboard creaking, the distant hum of traffic, the clock's relentless tick, seemed amplified, sinister. My eyelids grew heavy, leaden, but sleep remained elusive. Around 5, just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, a faint rustling whispered near the window. I jolted, fully awake, heart pounding. The window remained shut, the bolts secure, but the curtains trembled undeniably. I crept closer, pressing my ear to the cold glass, half expecting a voice, a breath. Only the frantic rhythm of my own breathing answered. Days bled into weeks, each night a repetition of the same chilling cycle. Secure the window, brace for the inevitable banging, sometimes soft taps, other times a violent assault. Each time, the discovery of the open window and the locked latch. Each time, the futile search for a rational cause. No wind, no draft, no structural fault I could identify. And the figure in the reflection. I saw it 3 more times, each glimpse sending waves of icy terror through me, each time vanishing the instant I turned. The living room became alien territory. I migrated my life to other parts of the house, reading in the kitchen, watching television huddled in my bedroom. The drawn curtains became a permanent fixture, the sight of that vast pain now triggering a Pavlovian dread. A couple of nights, I fled to the anonymity of a motel, craving undisturbed sleep, but returning felt inevitable. This was my home. Surrendering felt like a deeper kind of violation. Finally, I called Marcus, a friend with a knack for home repairs. I kept the explanation simple, edited. A stubborn window latch, defined logic. No mention of reflections, of unseen presences. He came over one evening. We sat in the tense silence of the living room while I detailed the mechanical failures. We tested the window, the locks. He suggested a secondary measure, a robust sliding bolt installed higher up. Together, we drilled and screwed it into place. Maybe the old girl just needs to breathe, he joked, attempting levity. I managed a weak smile, my palms slick with sweat. He left. I remained, a lone sentry in the darkening room. Lights off, I watched the window, a fragile hope flickering within me. Midnight passed. 1 a.m., 2, then the banging returned. Louder this time, more frantic, urgent. My heart leaped, lodging itself somewhere in my throat. I fumbled for the lamp. Light flooded the room. The window stood wide open. Both locks, the original latch, the new sliding bolt, were undone. The heavy bolt was slid back, retracted. Disbelief warred with terror. My muscles locked, breath hitched. Then my gaze flickered to the glass. The shape was there, behind me, closer than ever, seeming to lean in, peering over my shoulder. A choked sound escaped me as I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty, yet the air felt thick, charged with an unseen weight. I felt observed. I slammed the window shut, my hands shaking so violently I could barely manipulate the locks. Secured the latch, rammed the bolt home, double-checked. I stumbled back, feeling dizzy, faint. The banging had ceased, but the feeling of presence lingered, a cold spot on the back of my neck. Retreating to my bedroom felt like fleeing a battlefield. Every light blazed. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, pacing, trying to regulate my breathing, trying to quell the frantic tremor that shook my entire body. Skin clammy, stomach churning. Awake, yet utterly spent. Stay calm, I chanted internally. Stay calm. But the image persisted. That dark form by the window, waiting. And that brings me to now. To this telling, nothing is resolved. The window continues its nightly defiance. The banging persists. The shape in the glass remains my phantom companion, glimpsed at the edges of vision. My nerves are frayed wires humming with constant tension. I've exhausted my repertoire of solutions. Neighbors report nothing unusual. The locks mock my efforts. I feel cornered in my own home. Leaving feels like admitting defeat, yet staying chips away at my sanity, night by terrifying night. I listen for the first thud, my muscles tightening preemptively, my heart beginning its frantic race. My ears strain against the silence, amplifying every creak. I still hope, foolishly perhaps, for a simple answer. But I cannot unsee what I have seen. It isn't normal. It isn't stopping. The window I once adored is now a source of profound dread. Every night I brace. Every night I glimpse the darkness coalescing behind me in the glass. I lock it again and again. It yields, it opens, and I remain, watching, waiting, terrified to turn away for too long. This is my reality now, and I don't know what it means. I only know it's real, and it won't let go. The instant my gaze fell upon the savage gouges scarring the motel room walls, a certainty colder than the night air settled in my gut. Checking into this place was a catastrophic error, but the lock had clicked, the key heavy in my pocket. Retreat was no longer an option. The darkness outside was merely a prelude to the waking nightmare coalescing within these four walls. Miles had bled into hours behind the wheel, my eyelids like leaden curtains threatening a final drop. Through the oppressive blackness, the lurid neon pulse of the dusty trail inn beckoned. A siren song promising oblivion on a lumpy mattress before the highway reclaimed me. How seductive that promise. How foolish my surrender. I should have spurred my weary car onward into the anonymity of the road. Pulling in, I found the cracked asphalt sparsely populated. Only a pair of rust-eaten pickups shared the gloom with my sedan. The office, a cramped cube steeped in the ghosts of stale tobacco and cloying chemical pine, felt sepulchral. Behind the counter, Silas, a gaunt man whose rheumy eyes seemed adrift in a sea of wrinkles, offered less than a glance from his flickering, antiquated television as he slid the key to room 7 across the chipped formica. "Checkout's 11, he rasped, his attention already returning to the cathode glow. A flicker in his eyes as I turned, a barely perceptible tremor in the hand that relinquished the key. Details I registered too late, lost as I was in the fog of exhaustion and the simple craving for sleep. Warning flares extinguished by fatigue. The journey to my designated door stretched, each crunch of gravel underfoot unnaturally loud in the vast, humming silence that pressed in from the unseen highway. Reaching room 7, a prickle of wrongness made my hand falter above the tarnished knob. Road weariness, I told myself, dismissing the internal alarm, and pushed inward. It was precisely the species of dreary one expects for the price. Wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin, a bed whose springs sighed under the weight of past occupants, a television set that might have witnessed history unfold in black and white. Yet it was the walls that seized my focus. Within the weak illumination slanting through the flimsy curtains, the paint bore deep, violent scars. Not isolated marks, but a frantic calligraphy covering every surface, even stretching in places onto the stained ceiling tiles. Some were ancient, their edges smoothed by time or touch. Others looked brutally fresh, the paint around them curled back like torn flesh. A shiver traced its way down my spine as my fingers explored a particularly deep groove. What desperation, what feral energy could inflict such wounds? And why linger, unpatched, unpainted, like a permanent scream? My bag thumped to the floor, fatigue vaporized by a sudden, urgent need to flee. I spun towards the door, ready to demand a different room, a refund, anything to propel me back into the relative safety of the night. But as my fingers brushed the cool metal of the handle, a sound reached me, faint, insidious, a dry, scritch, scritch, scritching from somewhere inside the room. I froze, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Silence. Then it resumed, louder, closer. Its origin seemed to be the bathroom. Every nerve shrieked, "Run!" Yet some morbid curiosity, or perhaps paralysis, drew me towards the closed bathroom door. The scratching intensified, now underscored by a low, guttural vibration that resonated deep in my chest and raised the hairs on my nape. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, reached for the knob. The instant my skin grazed the cold brass, the sounds ceased utterly. The ensuing silence was a vacuum, more terrifying than the noise it replaced. How long I remained rooted there, hand hovering, I cannot say. Too petrified to twist the knob, too locked in fear's embrace to retreat. Finally, I forced a backward step, then another, my gaze fixed on the impassive bathroom door. My heel struck the bed frame. I nearly vaulted out of my skin. Turning sharply, my breath hitched. There, partially obscured by the cheap, dusty bed skirt, lay a journal. Its leather binding was scuffed and scored, unnervingly echoing the walls that imprisoned me. With hands that shook as if palsied, I retrieved it. The pages, brittle and yellowed, were dense with frantic looping script, punctuated by desperate pleas. Phrases leapt out, stark against the aged paper. It wakes with the dark. Avoid the looking glass. The walls always listen. The final entry, penned in a spidery, disintegrating hand, read simply, "You've read this. Too late. It knows you now." A deafening bang from the bathroom sent the journal tumbling from my grasp. The door shuddered violently in its frame, as if assaulted by a battering ram from within. I lunged for the room door, heart threatening to detonate, clawing at the handle. It refused to yield. Locked. Trapped. Panic surged, hot and acidic in my throat. The assault on the bathroom door escalated, a frantic, splintering percussion. Wood groaned, hinges shrieked their protest. My eyes darted wildly, seeking escape. The window! I scrambled towards it, only to find it sealed fast, the glass thick, unyielding. Turning back in desperation, my gaze snagged on the tarnished mirror bolted to the wall. For one heart-stopping fraction of a second, its surface held more than my own terrified reflection. A silhouette, hunched and malformed, eyes burning with a cold, impossible light. I blinked. It vanished. The bathroom door imploded, spraying shards of wood across the room. A fleeting impression of something emerging. Something angular, disjointed, utterly alien to the waking world, seared itself onto my retinas before instinct slammed my eyelids shut. I recoiled, pressing myself into the furthest corner, making myself small. I could hear it moving, a wet, ragged respiration, the click and scrape of claws on linoleum drawing nearer. Then the smell washed over me. Decay mingled with an ozonic wrongness, the stench of things that fester outside of nature. Eyes squeezed tight, I offered silent, incoherent bargains to any indifferent cosmos that might hear. The scratching sound enveloped me, a multi-directional nightmare crawling across the walls, the floor whispering closer, closer. And then, absolute stillness. The room settled into a silence broken only by the ragged tearing of my own breath. Slowly, dreading what awaited, I peeled open my eyelids. The room was empty. Utterly, inexplicably empty. No monster, no shattered bathroom door. Even the deep scars on the walls had vanished, leaving smooth, indifferent paint, as if they had been mere phantoms of my exhausted mind. For a disorienting moment, I grasped at hallucination, at stress-induced delusion. But then my eyes fell upon the journal, still lying open on the floor where I'd dropped it. Trembling, I picked it up. I flipped through its pages. Blank. Every single one. Pristine and untouched. The subsequent hours are a blur. Escape. Somehow, I found my way out of that room, out of the Dusty Trail Inn, fleeing into the pre-dawn chill. I drove without cease, chasing the rising sun until it blazed high overhead, and 2 state lines lay between me and that place. I've tried, relentlessly, to rationalize it as a nightmare, born of fatigue and the inherent creepiness of roadside desolation. But sometimes, in the dead quiet of the night, I hear it. That faint, dry scratching just beyond my own bedroom door. And I know, with chilling certainty, that the presence from room 7 wasn't confined to those walls. It watches, it waits, and sometimes, catching my own reflection unexpectedly, I see a flicker in the eyes staring back, a glimmer of something ancient and hungry, a smile revealing far too many teeth. I avoid motels now. Sleep itself is a luxury I can rarely afford. Because the world, I now understand, holds pockets of shadow where sanity frays, where nightmares bleed into reality in places like the Dusty Trail Inn. I know that one day the gouges might reappear on my own walls, the journal might materialize, its pages once again filled with dire pronouncements, and the entity from room 7 will resume its interrupted task. Until that day, I drive. I keep moving, never lingering, never truly resting. Because perpetual motion feels like a shield, a way to pretend that night is sealed in the past, a way to pretend I am safe. But the truth resonates deep in my bones. There is no real escape from room 7, not truly, not ever. "10 years I've wrestled these metal beasts across Brazil's veins. Yet one particular knot of asphalt still tightens something deep inside me. It's nothing more than a crossroads, really, lost in the vast, whispering sugarcane oceans of rural Sao Paulo. But there, the world changes. My radio crackles into oblivion. The phone becomes a useless brick. Even the omnipresent chorus of insects falls utterly silent. It's a vacuum, a held breath in the landscape, and it unnerves me profoundly every single passage. My rig first rumbled onto this specific route maybe 5 years back. It's a long haul, mostly ribbon and two-lane blacktop flanked by towering walls of green cane. Occasionally, a gap reveals a weathered farmhouse or a rutted dirt track snaking away, but mostly it's just that relentless, claustrophobic verdure. The intersection itself, unremarkable on any map, just a turn leading towards scattered, isolated farms. I recall the first crossing vividly. High noon, the sun beating down. The radio's sudden surrender to static was the initial tremor. Annoying, but not unheard of on Brazil's backroads. Then the phone signal flatlined. Again, plausible. The truly unsettling part was the silence that rushed in to fill the void. Usually, the air hums, thick with the thrum of unseen life in the cane. That day, it felt as if cotton had been stuffed in my ears. A strange pressure built. I killed the engine briefly, straining to catch any sound from outside. Nothing. Absolute stillness. Only after I drove on did the familiar symphony of the countryside cautiously resume. Initially, I dismissed it. Anomalies of reception in the hinterlands. Subsequent trips confirmed the pattern, the dead zone, the suffocating quiet. But nothing overtly strange manifested, until about a year into the job, a northbound delivery necessitated traversing that intersection deep in the night. Nearly 2 a.m, I remember, fatigue blurring the edges of the world, my thoughts drifting toward coffee at the next truck stop. The road ahead was a tunnel bored through utter blackness by my headlights. The sugarcane stood sentinel on either side, unnaturally still, untouched by any breeze. My radio hissed white noise, so I silenced it. The phone lay inert beside me, displaying its stark lack of connection. The air felt thick, heavy. Then, a flicker of movement on the right shoulder. Something pale, looked human-shaped, draped in white. My first thought, stranded motorist, maybe a hitchhiker needing aid. I eased off the accelerator. My high beams splashed across the spot, illuminating what resembled a long dress. No face was discernible. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, the figure ceased to be. Not fled, not ducked, simply evaporated. My foot slammed the brake. The truck groaned, shuddering to a halt as my heart hammered against my ribs. I stared, eyes wide, at the empty space where it had stood. Fatigue, yes, but I knew. I'd seen something. Engine idling, I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight. My legs felt unsteady climbing down from the cab. I swept the beam along the roadside, probing the dense wall of cane, expecting... what? Someone collapsed? The stiff leaves rustled as I pushed them aside, but revealed no disturbance deeper within. No footprints marred the damp earth, no snagged fabric, nothing. After minutes that stretched thin, I retreated to the truck, my palms slick with sweat. I sat, gripping the wheel, forcing my breathing to slow before engaging the gears. That image burned behind my eyes for the rest of the night. Later, I mentioned it to Mateo, another driver who knew the region. He just shrugged, offered platitudes about lonely roads and tricks of the eye at night, said he'd driven that stretch countless times, day and night, never seen a thing. His dismissal sowed doubt, a reflection, a hallucination born of weariness. Months drifted by. Then came another midnight passage. This time I was alert, hyper-aware. The familiar silence crashed down like a physical weight. Even the hiss of my air conditioning felt intrusive. My gaze swept the verges, scanning. Just as I reached the turnoff, a peripheral flutter to my left. Instantaneous, almost subliminal, but undeniably the impression of white fabric whisking away at the extreme edge of my headlight cone. My hands clamped onto the wheel. That same visceral jolt shot through my chest. No clear figure this time, just that fleeting suggestion. I didn't stop. A cold dread coiled in my gut, urging me onward. I convinced myself the schedule was paramount, though the skin along my neck prickled and a clammy sweat broke out across my back. For a long spell after that, I rearranged my runs, contriving to hit that junction only under the forgiven light of day. I shared my experiences with a few other haulers. They acknowledged the signal void, the unnerving quiet, chalked it up to geographic quirks. But no one else spoke of a figure in white. Perhaps it was just that stretch, they reasoned. Maybe. But what I'd seen felt alien, intrusive, not part of any natural order. Let me be clear, I'm not prone to fanciful tales, no believer in phantasmas or roadside spirits. My world is concrete. Load, drive, unload, repeat. Breakdowns, treacherous roads, the occasional unsettling encounter near rest areas. These are occupational hazards. But that intersection, it disturbed me on a primal level I couldn't rationalize away. Then came a night about 6 months ago, one that burrowed deep under my skin. Hauling produce, delayed by unforeseen snarls, I knew I wouldn't reach the crossroads until perhaps 3 in the morning. A light rain was falling, not a deluge, but enough to slick the asphalt and veil the world in shifting gauze. My wipers swept hypnotic arcs across the windshield. The radio offered only static, promptly silenced. The phone, predictably, showed no bars. Approaching the intersection, that familiar tightness constricted my chest. My eyes darted, probing the rain-streaked darkness. The cane seemed taller, denser, leaning in. Rain tapped a nervous rhythm on the glass. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. And there it was again. A pale form coalescing at the roadside, barely distinct through the drizzle and gloom. I instinctively slowed, heart pounding a frantic tempo, mouth instantly dry. Then, cutting through the engine's thrum and the rain's whisper, a sound. Low, soft, a drawn-out moan. It sounded impossibly close, like sorrow-given voice, yet devoid of discernible words. I braked harder, peering, thinking perhaps someone was genuinely injured this time. I cracked the window. The sound vanished. Raindrops kissed my arm, cold against my suddenly chilled skin. Hazard lights pulsing, I grabbed the flashlight once more. The cane swayed, dripping. Water pattered on leaves. I stepped onto the shoulder, beam slicing through the wet darkness, scanning the ground. Again, nothing. No tracks, no signs of passage. Then, a faint rustling behind me. I spun, flashlight beam trembling. It illuminated only the endless rows of dripping cane swaying slightly in the night air. But the feeling of being watched was immense, palpable. A tingling crawled up my arms, no figure visible, yet the sense of presence was overwhelming. I scrambled back into the cab, slamming and locking the door. I sat there for a long minute, breath ragged, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and my own fear. My shirt clung damply to my back. With immense effort, I forced the truck back into motion. The remaining miles that night felt like traversing an eternity. Sleep offered little refuge for a week afterward. The memory of that soft moan echoed. Human? Animal? I've heard wounded creatures cry out. This wasn't that. I mentioned it to another driver. He speculated about a local worker, someone trying to flag me down, but the emptiness, the vanishing. How? Over the ensuing months, I cautiously broached the subject with locals in roadside diners. A few nodded knowingly, confirming they'd heard similar whispers. One old fellow muttered about the stretch having bad energy, a place he wouldn't walk after dark. Another confirmed the dead zone for signals was notorious, a reason to keep moving. No one offered anything concrete. Some chuckled, teasing me about night nerves and shadows playing tricks. Others just shrugged, unwilling or unable to elaborate. I inquired discreetly about accidents, tragedies tied to the spot, but gleaned nothing specific. I didn't press. Turning my runs into some kind of spectral investigation held no appeal. I just wanted to do my job, keep my sanity intact. Yet every approach to that place became an exercise in bracing myself. Roughly 2 months ago, another late run brought me there around 1 a.m., a clear, crisp night this time. A spray of stars glittered overhead, the moon a cold disk. Sometimes moonlight helps, pushes back the shadows. I hoped it would steady my nerves. Predictably, as I neared, the radio dissolved into static hiss. I clicked it off. That familiar pressure built in my chest. I eased my speed. This time, movement registered directly ahead, square in the middle of the intersection. My first thought was a stray animal. I tensed, ready to brake hard. But the shape resolved into that same haunting white. A dress-like form, stark against the asphalt, yet featureless. No head, no limbs discernible. Just presence. Ice water seemed to flood my veins. What the hell? The words escaped my lips, loud in the silent cab. And then, poof, gone. Utterly. I blinked, scanned frantically. The intersection lay empty under the moonlight. The cane fields stood motionless. Only the rumble of my engine and the frantic thudding of my own pulse in my ears remained. I drove on, unable to will my heart rate down, acutely aware of the sweat soaking my armpits. My hands trembled on the wheel. I cranked the AC, hoping the frigid air might shock me back to normalcy. My eyes kept flicking to the mirrors, half expecting pursuit. Every roadside shadow leaped, menacing. Minutes later, crossing some invisible threshold, my phone pinged. Signal restored. The radio sputtered, finding a distant station. It was like surfacing from deep water. I lack a name for this phenomenon. Ghost? Illusion? I offer no theories. All I possess is the visceral certainty of that intersection's wrongness. The air hangs differently there, heavier, expectant. Maybe tragedy stained that patch of earth once. Maybe it's a bizarre pocket of electromagnetic interference. The why remains elusive, but the dread is real. Each time I approach, that knot forms low in my gut. A numbness creeps into my arms. My jaw clenches involuntarily. My eyes scan, anticipating that flicker of white. Just 2 weeks passed, the schedule conspired against me again. Another post-midnight arrival unavoidable. Traffic on the main highway had bled away my buffer. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station 20 miles shy of the spot, needing a moment to collect myself. Checked the tires, grabbed a lukewarm coffee, exchanged a few words with the attendant. He mentioned, unprompted, that the area beyond the next rise had its share of strange tales. Spoke of whispers about a figure in white, though he'd never seen it himself. Hearing it from him sent a genuine chill down my spine. I didn't ask for more. Back on the road. The night was serene, stars brilliant, the sweet, earthy perfume of sugarcane filling the air. As my GPS ticked down the miles to the junction, I preemptively killed the radio. My phone signal wavered. 1 bar, 0, 1, then died. I slowed, drew a deep, deliberate breath, focusing intently on the ribbon of road ahead. Sweat beaded on my palms. I kept wiping one hand on my jeans, the other gripping the wheel tight. The sign indicating the turnoff loomed. The cane pressed close, impenetrable walls of shadow. The road stretched empty before me, though far behind. I thought I glimpsed the distant lights of another truck. Within a quarter mile, the silence descended, thick and absolute. My engine's roar seemed muffled, distant. I cracked the window, listening. No crickets, no wind rustling the leaves, nothing. I rolled into the intersection itself. Headlights swept the familiar scene. Asphalt, shoulder, cane, normal, empty. For a fleeting second, relief washed over me. Perhaps this time. But then, peripherally, a slow drift of movement. I snapped my head left. There, poised just at the verge where blacktop met cane. That same impression of a long, white garment, utterly still. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. My foot hit the brake, the sudden deceleration pressing me hard against the seatbelt. The shape seemed to recede, melting back into the dense foliage. I strained my eyes, desperate for detail, for confirmation of humanity, a face, hands, anything. But there was only the white form and the silent, unmoving leaves. Sweat trickled down my temples. The acrid scent of my own fear filled the cab. Seconds ticked by. The decision was instant. I wasn't getting out. Not this time. Not again. My foot found the accelerator. The truck surged forward. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breathing harsh and loud in the enclosed space. A minute down the road, the world switched back on. Night sounds rushed in. The radio, when I tried it, crackled with life. My phone vibrated. A notification. Service restored. Relief, potent and immediate, flooded through me, though my arms remained rigid, trembling. I checked my mirrors compulsively for miles. I don't face that crossing daily, but it remains an unavoidable part of the routes I run. I never know what awaits. Sometimes only the profound silence and the dead electronics mark the passage. Other times, that glimpse of white shreds my composure for days. Is there some unresolved echo clinging to that spot? Or is it merely a phantom woven from fatigue and suggestion? All I know for certain is the visceral truth of my encounters. Every time my headlights illuminate that turn, my stomach clenches. I brace for the silence, the dead air, and the potential audience of one, standing pale against the darkness. I rarely speak of it anymore. I just keep my eyes fixed ahead, grip the wheel, and push through. That's the job. That's how it's been. Haul the load, pass the place, hope the night remains empty. And if it doesn't, keep driving, because I'm not stopping again. No explanation suffices, but the feeling endures, raw and unsettling, even after all this time. It was on my second day adrift in that ocean of trees that the sound first found me. Crouched among waist-high ferns, my fingers tracing the delicate veins of a frond for the telltale bloom of blight, I was submerged in the morning's profound stillness. The air itself felt thick, weighted, then a single perfect chime sliced through the quiet. Not loud, not reverberating, yet piercingly distinct. My head snapped up, heart giving a sudden, violent kick against my ribs. No steeple pierced the canopy, no dwelling interrupted the endless weave of timber and emerald moss. Just the woods, indifferent and vast. I remained poised, lips parted, straining to catch an echo, a repeat, nothing. The resonance vanished as if swallowed by the leaves. My presence here was purely empirical. A contract botanist tasked with cataloging the indigenous flora. Collect, tag, observe growth cycles, dispatch findings to the distant lab. Mundane fieldwork, procedures etched into muscle memory from countless assignments, though none quite so profoundly isolated. My small nylon shelter stood a good 2 miles from the nearest rutted track, itself a lonely 20-mile artery connecting to negligible civilization. A bell had no business tolling in this wilderness. A tremor ran beneath my skin, a prickling awareness. My hands felt suddenly unsteady, clumsy, but I willed the disturbance away, turning back to the patient scrutiny of plants. Later, as the afternoon sun slanted gold through the upper branches, the chime returned. Higher this time, seemingly drifting down from the slope above. I pushed through the undergrowth, attempting to triangulate the source, but the sound dissolved before I could fix its origin. The forest floor tilted at capricious angles, the trees dense as a fortress wall. By the time I found myself amidst a solemn gathering of ancient pines, my sense of direction had blurred. The bell offered no further clues that day. Sleep, when it came that night, was thin. Lying rigid in my tent, eyes fixed on the taut fabric overhead, I listened to the sighing breeze, every nerve taut, anticipating another note that never arrived. Morning brought resolve. A more structured hunt was required. Into a small pack went water, rations, my compass, a notebook, too, for mapping my progress. Around midday, the familiar tone surfaced again, faint now, muffled, as though sounding through layers of heavy velvet. Breathe, stay methodical. I noted the bearing, then moved with deliberate quietness, stepping softly over root and stone, possessed by the absurd notion that noise might frighten it into silence. 15 minutes crept by. Then, closer, clearer, the bell. I adjusted my course, pushing directly towards it. Brambles tore at my trousers, boots sank into sunken pockets of mire, but I pressed on until the dense woods abruptly yielded to a small, unexpected clearing. At first glance, nothing. Just a circle of unnaturally flat grass, stones bearded with moss. Then, near the center, arresting the eye, a structure, an archway built of dark, weathered stones, standing solitary and stark, and suspended within its curve hung the bell. Vast, perhaps 2 feet across, its metal skin oxidized to a verdigris green, weeping rust. Adrenaline surged, hot and metallic in my throat. I swallowed against a sudden dryness. A thick rope, frayed near its end, dangled inertly from the clapper. It looked ancient, untouched by human hands for generations. Moss crept possessively down one flank. The arch itself bore fissures. Chunks of stone lay tumbled at its base. I scanned the perimeter. No path, no footprints, only the undisturbed sward. My own pulse thrummed heavily against the palm I pressed to my chest. The silence here felt different, deeper. How had it rung? A slow circuit revealed no wires, no hidden mechanisms. Nothing. For more than an hour, I lingered in that sun-dappled space, waiting, watching. The bell remained mute. Marking the coordinates with meticulous care, I finally retreated. Back at camp, a hurried meal of tinned beans and dry crackers did little to settle me. Later, near 10, while scouring my cook pot, the forest erupted with sound. 3 measured tolls, each distinct, separated by pregnant pauses. My hand spasmed, the pot nearly clattering to the ground. Heart hammering, gut clenched tight, I snatched my jacket, flicked on my headlamp, and plunged back into the woods. The sound seemed to emanate from the clearing's direction, but the night was absolute, my beam catching only a frantic dance of trunks and reaching limbs. Roots snagged my feet. Defeated, I turned back, yet the echo of those 3 chimes resonated in my skull long after I lay zipped inside my sleeping bag. The following day, laden with more supplies, I returned to the arch. Silence reigned. I stood before the bell for a long time, just looking. Reaching out, I touched its surface, startlingly cold despite the day's warmth. A tentative tug on the frayed rope produced a slight shift, a low, dull clank. I recoiled, half expecting a deafening peal, but only silence answered. Beneath the thick grass around the arch, my probing fingers found more stones, set in a deliberate rectangular outline, the ghost of a foundation for something long vanished. No carvings, no inscriptions, just age and anonymity. That night, I resolved to witness the chiming firsthand. Armed with my headlamp, spare batteries, and a small storm lantern, I trekked back to the clearing under a sky veiled by cloud. I arrived near 9. The air in the clearing felt perceptibly colder than the surrounding woods. Setting the lantern near the edge, its gentle glow illuminating the arch, I waited. Minutes stretched, taut as wire. My breath hitched in my throat. My shoulders ached with tension. Then, precisely as the hour turned 10, the first ring sounded. It came from the bell, undeniably, yet I could swear the metal itself hadn't visibly moved. Heat flooded my face. The second toll followed, its resonance filling the clearing, making my ears buzz, my legs feel watery. With the third ring, a faint luminescence flickered within the bell's dark mouth, a soft, ethereal glow coalescing around the clapper, like St. Elmo's fire, but sourceless. I stepped closer, flashlight beam trembling on the bell's interior. The glow pulsed, then died. Dizziness washed over me. My heart refused to slow, my throat constricted. Deep breaths forced calm. I remained frozen, waiting for more. None came. I examined the arch again, ran hands over cold, damp stone, peered inside the bell with my light. Empty space, the inert clapper, cobwebs, yet the light, the sound, they had been real. My eardrums still thrummed. Eventually, baffled and unnerved, I left. Over the next few days, I attempted immersion in my work, documenting rare orchids, analyzing soil composition, mapping moss colonies. But the forest spell was broken. Each afternoon, a solitary, random chime would drift through the trees, arresting my thoughts, and each night, punctual as a morbid clock, the triple toll sounded near 10. I fought to maintain composure, to rationalize, but my body betrayed me with cold sweats, a tightening vice around my chest, a dull hammering behind my temples. The nights became vigils, spent hunched by the dying fire, anticipating the inevitable rings that always came. One evening, compelled by a desperate need for proof, I carried a small digital camera to the clearing. I set it on a tripod, framing the arch precisely. 10 o'clock. The first ring echoed, visceral. I hit record, my fingers slick. The second ring seemed to shake the very air, vibrating through the camera, through my hands. The third toll arrived, and with it, that pale, impossible light shimmered deep within the bell's throat. I stared, transfixed, every muscle locked. The light flickered, waned, vanished. I stopped the recording, thumbed the playback button. Static hissed from the speaker. On the small screen, the bell hung dark and motionless. No sound, no light, just me, standing in a silent clearing, filming inert metal. A tremor started in my hands, spreading upwards. I replayed the clip again and again, searching for a glitch, a flicker I'd missed. Nothing. I fled the clearing then, stumbling through the darkness, breath tearing at my lungs, mouth parched. The forest felt suddenly suffocating, hostile. Back at camp, I dove into my tent, zipped it tight, fighting for control. "Leave," a rational voice screamed, "leave tomorrow." But another, deeper current tugged at me, the lure of the unsolved, the sense of having breached some veil. Sleep was a shallow, broken thing, punctuated by the ceaseless rhythm of my own frantic heart. Why a bell here? And why, it seemed, could only I perceive its call? Daylight brought a futile search through offline historical databases on my laptop. Old surveys, regional histories, nothing mentioned a chapel, a settlement, any structure in this remote tract. The maps showed only unbroken forest. I returned to the clearing that afternoon, driven to scrutinize the archstone by stone, photographing details, noting the faint tool-like chips almost erased by time. Later, sitting on a fallen log nearby, engrossed in my notes, I nearly missed it. A faint, solitary chime around 3 in the afternoon. My gaze shot up. The massive bell swayed just perceptibly, though the air was utterly still. The rope hung limp. The bell's interior remained a shadowed void, yet the sound had reached me. My pulse hammered. A tingling numbness spread through my fingertips. A lump formed in my throat. I stayed until dusk fell, watching, waiting to see if the transition to night brought any change. Nothing. Darkness gathered, thick and palpable. Flashlight on, eyes fixed unwaveringly on the bell. 10 o'clock. The first ring struck. I flinched but kept my gaze locked. A tiny spark, a brief flicker, bloomed inside the bell. My stomach twisted. The second ring followed, the flicker brightening fractionally. Ignoring the nausea rising in my gut, I took a hesitant step closer. The third ring arrived, louder, each beat resonating painfully in my skull. Sweat beaded on my palms. The light flared, held for a breathless second, then extinguished. Silence reclaimed the clearing. My hand reached for the rope, trembling. Its texture felt coarse, damp. Pull it? What would happen? Provoke another ring? Unleash something worse? With infinite caution, I gave it a gentle tug. The bell responded with that same dull metallic clank. Nothing more. No answering glow, no spectral consequence. A shaky breath escaped me. I let the rope fall, stepping back, shoulders rigid as stone. I felt I had prodded something ancient and unknowable. Wiping sweat from my brow, I turned and left the clearing for what I knew must be the last time. Back at camp, my attempts to document the night's events were foiled by my persistently sweaty, slipping grip on the pen. Water, a protein bar, attempts to ground myself felt futile. The forest, once a place of quiet study, now felt sentient, watchful, pressing in. Yet leaving felt like a surrender. One more night, I told myself, just one. If nothing new occurred, I would hike out at dawn. The bells came again at 10 as I lay rigid in my tent. This time I felt them as much as heard them. A physical vibration deep in my chest, my own heartbeat seeming to sink unwillingly with each toll. My knuckles were white where I gripped my sleeping bag. I counted the seconds between the rings, desperate for the silence that followed the third. When it came, my heart gradually slowed, but the shaking in my hands persisted. My thoughts felt fragmented, scattered. Sleep was a tormented landscape I drifted through for hours. First light was my signal. Packing became a frantic, focused activity. Samples secured, tent wrestled into its sack. A final, sweeping glance around the now alien campsite. My eyes strayed, involuntarily, toward the direction of the clearing. Silence. A heavy, expectant quiet hung over the woods. My chest felt constricted as I hefted my pack and began the trek out. The memory of that bell, its impossible sound and light, made my scalp prickle. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half dreading, half expecting some final sign. Nothing pursued me but the forest's immense indifference. My heartbeat remained erratic, a nervous flutter beneath my ribs. My steps quickened, driven by an urgent need for distance. Gripping my pack straps, I focused only on the path ahead, the rhythm of my boots on the earth. The trees were just trees again, the moss just moss, but the calm had been irrevocably broken. I needed out. I would not return. 3 hours it took to reach the dirt road, 3 hours devoid of any spectral chime. Relief warred with the persistent echo of those nightly rings in my mind, the phantom throb in my chest that flared without warning. Reaching my vehicle felt like surfacing from deep water. I collapsed into the driver's seat, hands still faintly trembling on a wheel. A few deep, ragged breaths. The turn of the key, the engine's reassuring rumble. I drove away, putting miles between myself and that haunted clearing. Yet, even now, the memory triggers a tightness in my chest, a cold flicker behind my eyes. That glow, that sound, unexplained, unresolved, etched into me like rust on old iron. The digital clock bled 3:19 a.m. onto the ceiling when the bedside telephone detonated the room's quietude. Its electronic shriek, sharp as shattered glass, yanked me from slumber. Heart hammering against ribs, I scrabbled blindly, fingers closing around the cool plastic. An unfamiliar string of digits glowed accusingly from the screen. A flicker of reason urged me toward voicemail, toward oblivion, but a deeper, more primal pulse, call it intuition, call it a morbid magnetism, compelled me to accept. Yes, my voice a rough, sleep-clogged thing. A rasping whisper answered, low and textured like dragging stone. Clara, I can see you. Those window coverings, hardly adequate, are they? I was instantly, brutally awake, galvanized upright in bed. My gaze flew to the window where the heavy drapes hung, suddenly feeling porous, insufficient barriers against the unseen gaze I could almost physically sense pressing in from the outer blackness. Who is this? The question ripped out, though I fought to leash the tremor beneath it. A chuckle, dry and brittle as dead leaves skittering on pavement, crawled through the receiver. A well-wisher, Clara, one who has observed you for quite some time. My thumb stabbed the end call icon. The phone clattered back onto the nightstand, my hand unsteady. A prank, surely. Some cruel amusement concocted by a bored adolescent, a spurned lover. Yet, sitting cocooned in the darkness, a silence now thick with menace rather than peace, a chilling certainty settled. This felt different, more calculated, more sinister. Sleep became an unattainable shore. I drifted on a restless tide, turning, twisting, each settling groan of the old house, each susurration of wind-stirred foliage outside, snapping my nerves taut. When the alarm finally bleated its 7 a.m. summons, the diluted gray of dawn seeping through the fabric felt less like relief and more like a temporary reprieve. The night's intrusion seemed distant then, distorted like the fading contours of a fever dream. I moved through the rituals, the scald of the shower, the bitterness of coffee, the mechanics of breakfast, constructing a flimsy barricade of normalcy around the memory. By the time I locked the door behind me, heading out into the workday world, the unsettling communion felt almost quarantined, almost unreal. Almost. The day unfolded in a predictable cadence of spreadsheets and strained pleasantries, the office's sterile rhythm a welcome anesthetic. Only, as I gathered my belongings, the city outside beginning to glitter with evening lights, did the phantom touch of that call return. My phone vibrated, nestled in my bag, a text message, unknown sender. That crimson sweater suits you, Clara, though I retain a fondness for the cornflower blue blouse from last Tuesday. Ice sluiced through my veins. My eyes dropped to the crimson knit I wore. A frantic scan of the remaining office occupants revealed only bowed heads, focused screens. No one watched. Yet someone, somewhere, was watching. Keys clenched, knuckles white, I nearly sprinted to the sanctuary of my car. The drive home transformed into a gauntlet of apprehension, each stoplight stretching into an agonizing pause where I dissected the occupants of nearby vehicles, searching for an unnerving focus, a lingering stare. Inside my apartment, bolts slid home, chains rattled into place, curtains were yanked shut with violent finality. I collapsed onto the sofa, mind a frantic loom, weaving and unweaving possibilities. An old flame? A colleague nursing a hidden grudge? No theory felt substantial enough. The phone buzzed again. Another anonymous number. You should nourish yourself, Clara. You barely disturbed your salad at lunch. I hurled the device across the room. It struck the thick rug with a muffled thud. How? How could they possess such knowledge? The intimate cartography of my day. The subsequent days dissolved into a fog of hypervigilance. The intrusions persisted. Calls from ghost numbers, texts freighted with unnervingly specific observations. They chronicled my waking moments, my attire, my conversations, even the title of the escapist fantasy novel tucked away for solitary hours. A new phone number offered no shield. The police listened politely, noted the absence of overt threats, and offered sympathetic helplessness. I was adrift in a waking nightmare, perpetually glancing over my shoulder, flinching at sudden noises. The world outside my locked doors a landscape of potential watchers. A week after the initial violation, I was unraveling. Sleep was a forgotten luxury, appetite a memory. I'd retreated from work, sight an illness, the prospect of public exposure unbearable under the weight of that unseen scrutiny. I sat in the dim-lit living room, curtains drawn against the day, staring at the silent phone, anticipating the next poisoned whisper. It arrived, different this time, stark and direct. "The time for observation is over, Clara. Let us meet. Riverside Park, midnight. Attend alone. Deviation will invite consequences." My immediate reaction was recoil, a visceral urge to flee, to alert the authorities, to disappear. But another current pulled within me. Exhaustion, the corrosive weariness of constant fear, a desperate need for confrontation, for an end. Perhaps, face to face, I could sever this invisible tether. Perhaps I could reclaim myself. Against every rational instinct, midnight found me traversing the deserted park paths. A fat, luminous moon hung overhead, etching long, skeletal shadows onto the manicured lawns. Each rustle in the undergrowth, each sharp snap of a distant twig sent jolts through my system. Approaching the park's heart, near the dormant fountain, a silhouette materialized. Backlit by a lone sodium lamp, its features remained indistinct pools of darkness. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I closed the distance. "Hello, Clara," the figure murmured, and the voice, that gravelly, unforgettable rasp from the first call, solidified the nightmare. "I appreciate you accepting my invitation." As the figure shifted, stepping into the weak spill of light, a gasp tore from my throat. Not the leering stranger of my imagination, no vengeful ex-lover. It was Iris. Iris from the tech support department, the quiet one with downcast eyes, someone I'd exchanged perhaps a dozen Odine pleasantries with over the years. "Why?" The word was a strangled croak. "Why are you doing this?" Iris's lips curved into a smile utterly devoid of warmth, a chilling rictus. "Why?" Because I could. Because access was laughably simple. You, all of you, navigate your lives utterly oblivious to your own transparency, the sheer volume of self you broadcast. She produced a sleek tablet, her fingers dancing across its surface. Your phone, Clara, your laptop, your networked thermostat, your smart speaker, every device a portal, a window easily opened by anyone possessing the requisite keys. Nausea rose in my throat. All this time, the intrusion hadn't been physical, but digital. She had been observing me through the very technology meant to simplify my life. But me, specifically, what did I ever do to you? A hollow laugh escaped her, devoid of mirth. You? Nothing personal. You were merely optimal, the ideal blend of trusting nature and technological naivete, a perfect specimen for my little exploration. Exploration? I echoed, the word barely audible. To probe the limits, Iris clarified, her eyes catching the lamplight with an unnerving gleam. To ascertain the depth of penetration possible, how intimately one could inhabit another's existence undetected. And you, Clara, were a remarkably rich subject. The vulnerabilities, the routines, the hidden anxieties. She trailed off, shaking her head with a kind of detached, academic fondness. But every exploration reaches its terminus, and I'm afraid, Clara, your participation is scheduled for discontinuation. As she spoke, her hand dipped inside her jacket. A flicker of reflected light. Metal. With dawning horror, I recognized the shape she was withdrawing. A handgun. Time seemed to warp, stretching thin. I saw Iris's index finger tighten. I saw the dark eye of the barrel align with my chest. In that stretched second, instinct, raw and primal, surged. I lunged, colliding with her unprepared frame. We crashed together, a tangle of limbs grappling for the weapon. The only sounds are ragged gasps against the park's silence. She possessed surprising strength, wiry and determined, but desperation fueled me. A sudden, deafening report split the night air. For a suspended moment, uncertainty reigned. Then Iris staggered back, a bewildered expression painting her face. Her gaze dropped to the rapidly blossoming crimson stain on her shirt front, then lifted back to mine before her legs buckled and she crumpled onto the damp grass. I stood, the unexpected weight of the gun heavy in my palm, the echo of the shot reverberating in my skull. An unknown interval passed in frozen tableau before the distant wail of sirens pierced the stillness, jolting me back to the fractured present. The aftermath was a disorienting montage of flashing lights, clipped questions, and the sterile quiet of assessment rooms. Iris survived, critically wounded, her digital predation laid bare. Mine was not the only life she had meticulously dissected. Dozens had been unwitting subjects in her exploration, their privacy meticulously breached through the devices they embraced. Months bled into seasons. I changed. The smart devices vanished from my home. A vigilant distrust became my default setting. The open, easygoing woman I once was felt like a ghost, replaced by someone perpetually scanning the periphery, forever questioning the unseen currents of the digital world. Yet, slowly, painstakingly, fragments of trust began to reemerge, cautiously offered, tentatively accepted. Healing began, not as a return to the past, but as the construction of a new, more guarded self. I recount this now, not as a closed chapter, but as an open warning. In this hyper-connected tapestry we inhabit, the illusion of privacy is fragile. Our lives, rendered in data streams, become legible texts for those who possess the literacy to read them. Remain aware. Remain cautious. Remember always, in the age of the ubiquitous screen, you can never be entirely certain who else might be looking through the glass.